Hi everyone, and welcome to the second official NextTech webinar. Today we're talking about resumes, and we've got two really great guests here to give us some advice on the do's and don'ts for STEM resumes in particular. And they're actually going to be reviewing 3 real student resumes so we can get some tips on making our own resumes better. So why don't I introduce our guests? First, we have Dr. Matthew Hull, Program Manager of the Nano and Nanobio Thrust areas at Virginia Tech's Institute for Critical Technology and Applied Science, where he helps advance nano and nanobio-related research and scholarship with a focus on tech transfer and stimulating economic growth through nanotechnology innovations. Our next guest is Robert Kondilas, Chief Technology Officer for the National Security Group at General Dynamics Information Technology, where he focuses on implementing technology-based solutions to drive more efficiency, engagement, and value as measured by return on investment. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? First, I'd really just love to get your thoughts on resumes. What do you like in a resume? What do you not like in a resume? Specifically for students who are just getting started out in their careers in the STEM field. Matt, why don't you go first?
Sure. I think there's a visual appeal to when you are handed a resume. Your eye immediately goes to how is the resume structured? Is the information that I want to see located where I expect to see it? I want to see name clearly written. I want to know who I'm looking at there, sort of where they're from. And I want to see nice structure to how the resume is laid out. And this is before I even start looking at the content. There has to be that sort of visual appeal. And then I want to have information ready to me at a glance. I will logically look at their educational background, where are they coming from, particularly for a student, because they have limited professional experience. So having the information that I expect out of a student readily available is really what I'm looking for. And then I'm looking for indicators of leadership, self-starter. I'm looking for students who have maybe went above and beyond their classwork. Maybe they volunteered. Maybe they have served as a mentor in some capacity. So I'm really looking for those kind of indicators of some type of blossoming leadership, somebody who's willing to go the extra mile and do things. I'm not looking for a great deal of detail about individual experiences at that point. I want to see conversation starters. I think a mistake that I see in a lot of student resumes is there's an enormous amount of text in there that in many cases I'm not even going to have an opportunity to thoroughly read and recall readily when it comes to an interview time. So I want to be able to have information organized where I want to see it quickly. I want to have conversation starters that sort of frame the student or highlight some of the student's attributes that we're going to zero in on during an interview, or that are really going to provoke some conversations about whether or not they're going to be suitable for a position. So that's just the off the cuff sort of what makes a good resume. And I guess the bad resume would be opposite, where I'm having to struggle for information. And this is sort of the result of good intentions, where students really trying hard to put everything in there, and it's coming at the cost of organization and cleanness of the resume. The information I need isn't quickly available to me. And again, it's things I'm not going to readily recall if I'm going through a stack of resumes. So I think that's probably a good opener for me.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question on that. You mentioned about leadership skills and building up leadership skills. And I think when I was a student, I didn't realize that the extracurriculars that I did could go on my resume. So is that something that it's good to put on resumes if you are the leader of a club, or if you've done some other kind of soft skills building extracurriculars?
That is something that, as I have progressed in my career, that I just absolutely love to see. You certainly have to exercise some discretion in terms of what you want to add on there. But if it's something that indicates a softer skill in particular that might stand out with a hiring manager, then certainly. And for many years, I wrestled with whether or not I led a Kiva lending team, a micro lending team. This had nothing to do with any professional position that I had. This was just something I did in my spare time. And these were $25 micro loans that we were making, but it was a team that I was part of and helped get together. And I didn't put it on a resume. And then it has slowly made its way to my resume as I have sort of matured in my own career, because I think that kind of thing matters. And I love to see when students have done things that they weren't expected to. They were things that they had some sort of passion and drive to pursue. those things just really matter to me nowadays. So finding a good place to feature them on the resume, I think it's memorable. It conveys to me a lot more than just the words on the page.
So, Robert, do you have anything to add to that or stories to tell?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Matt hit it on the head with a lot of things that he said. I'd only add a couple of things. One is I think that resumes have to have a flow to them. And I think some of that Matt spoke to about like are things in the right place. And I think the other thing is that depending on if you're new in your career or you're a senior in your career, you have about 60 seconds, I think, to make an impression on someone looking at a resume. And if your resume doesn't grab them within the 60 seconds, and it has to pretty much be on the first page because them getting to the second page of a resume is never guaranteed. But I think you have to have something that stands out that really speaks to why you're the perfect person for this role. And I'd even tell you that a lot of people do resumes where they create a resume and they send it out to 100 people. And I think that this may be a little bit later in the conversation, but it's like you really have to cater to who your audience is and what they're looking for and craft your resume. And this is not misrepresentation, but it's really if someone is looking for CADs and simulations and drawings, you really need to tease that out in your resume to show that you have that experience, because the first person to look at a resume is basically the person that is going to either say that you're in or you're out. And it's not the hiring manager usually, it's probably someone in HR, and they're going to be looking at keywords and stuff like that. If you don't have the keywords on your resume, you probably won't get set to the left. You'll probably be set to the right, which is, a thanks but no thanks.
Well, that's some really good advice. And that's something I think that is a little bit of an art, trying to figure out how to incorporate those sorts of keywords into your resume without making it unnatural.
Exactly. The other thing that Matt said about having a hobby and stuff, I like as well. I mean, it gives a hiring manager a little bit more background than they could get just by reading a resume. I mean, let's just say that someone has an interest in macro photography or whatever. Macro photography requires a lot of patience. It's finding the right subject. It's a composition of a photo, and there's math that's involved, and there's color and everything else. And so by having something that resonates, that is maybe, if you're in a technical field, balancing out, both sides of the brain, left brain versus right brain, I think it can help.
With that, I think that was a really good introduction to resumes. And I think let's get right into the actual student resumes to review. Let me pull up the first one. And I have removed most of the identifying information on here to protect the students, but they would love to hear any feedback that you guys have. Why don't we start with Matt, just so we don't have people talking over each other.
Okay, so I have that one in front of me that you have on the screen now. And I will just go off some immediate things that struck out at me. So first off, this one did not print off correctly for me. So actually, John Doe was cut in half on the top. And this is sort of one of those indicators for, it could be a problem on my end. It could be a formatting issue on the applicant's end. But what it looks like to me is they have taken some license here with stretching or shrinking the header and footer. And so, my first impression is, I can't really see the name very well. But it is something to be mindful of. It's a good lesson, I think, is just making sure that you have sort of a standard format and font that is going to be reproducible on most computers. Folks have different, Mac, PC, different software programs, whatever.
Yeah, in fact, I'd recommend, Matt, that they use PDF exclusively unless there is a submission program where it can only accept Word documents. That way you get out of the formatting issues.
Right. And then I also noticed just so some of like the expected May 2021, and again, I'm looking for symmetry when I just look at a visually appealing or look at a CV or resume. I'm looking for just balance there, and I just noticed that. Now, the next thing that really, let's see, what I found about this student was they have a lot of great experience and just really strong professional work experience. So research experience at MIT and some very nice, I mean, some of these capabilities are just very impressive because technically I happen to be somewhat familiar with some of these things. And so I'm just looking at that and thinking this is a student who has done a lot of really interesting and technically relevant work. So, those are kind of my my first impressions here, and I think I'll stop there and see what comments Robert has.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Matt. So looking at the first resume, I think there is some issues with formatting, I think, in the way that it looks. I mean, if you look at the Prince George Community College graduated in 2017 is offset from the expected graduation of May 2021. Going down into the professional work experience, I'll tell you that for me, it's important that people understand. You have to remember that the first person that looks at this may not be the person that is going to hire you. And so some things may not resonate with them. So like in the first bullet, CVD. So people won't know what CVD is. It's always good to spell it out and put it in parentheses. The other thing is, I'm a stickler for this from when I was in high school, and I had an English teacher drove it into me. Make sure that you have proper capitalization. So like AutoCAD is a capital CAD. The other thing is that in the professional work experience, I was a little thrown off by the sequencing. So in your first experience with MIT, it shows summer of 2017, but then the next one shows that it's 2016 to present. So if it's something that's present, it should be the first thing, and then things that would be in reverse chronological order going back. Another comment, and I'm sorry, I'm just jumping around here, but in the MIT experience, I'm not sure what PR is. PR Jing Kong, but it may be a proper noun. I'm not sure. Let's see. The other thing is I like the use of verbs here in the bullets where you say use and improve and transfer. These are things that you're responsible for. I'd say improving contact resistance, transferring 2D materials from various substrates, designing narrow size markers. And then for stuff that is past experience, use the past tense. So characterize graphene and semiconductors, investigated the photoresponse of graphene. And again, make sure that you have symmetry with respect to capitalization. This person capitalized in the second bullet, photoresponse, but in the third bullet didn't. The other thing is equipments. Is equipments different from equipment? Moving on to the Devops Engineer. I did a search on Linux, Java, or Nube. That's not a name of a company. So think about these things as a resume to me is a marketing. It's a think about when you go to a car dealership or you go online and you read about a product that you're going to buy. That's what an employer is doing. So you want to make sure that it's all accurate. And for me, if things don't look right on the resume, then I start to dig in a little bit deeper and say, what else is not right here? Moving down into the related projects, and I hope I'm not going into too much detail, but like in the first bullet, in the related projects, this person talked about using Arduino for home automation and as a remote car starter, but they called out Arduino in the remote car starter, but then I had to dig into home automation to see that they were using Raspberry Pi and Arduino. So I think that there should be some natural groupings. And then lastly, moving on to skills. So, seeing that this is a technical person, I would think that their languages would be like computer science languages. And then they went into programming languages and then operating system. I would say that skills are in programming languages and operating systems, but the spoken languages would not be in skills. And the other thing to mention here on Geek Squad in the Advanced Repair Agent, Geek Squad is now part of Best Buy. I think that you want to always make sure that people can identify with the entity that you worked for and what you did for them.
So as just a question that I thought of as you were going through that is, if the job specifically wanted the languages, would you incorporate the languages into your skills section?
I would, definitely.
Okay.
I just think that maybe you deprioritize it. You move spoken languages down, because when people are, now I'll tell you that if this person wanted to be hired teaching people that had English as a second language, I would say then maybe the spoken language should come first, but I deprioritize it based on the job they're going for.
Okay, that's really helpful. Any other thoughts on this resume?
From a formatting perspective, I think that there could be a little bit better use of space. And then, from one last thing, and this is for any of the resumes, make sure that there's something to talk about when you get to the interview. I think that it's so important. I think sometimes people try and put as much as they can onto a resume in order to get to the job, and then there's nothing to really talk about in terms of people. It's like everything you say in the interview is already on the resume. And that will become more important as you get later in your career in looking at culling out the things that are relevant to the person and that speak to the value that you'll deliver to the company.
That also addresses one other problem with it. This is probably the most textually dense of the three resumes, and I think doing what Robert described there would help. Some of these things could be reduced to a line rather than a line and a half, and that opens up. So okay, what did you do when you designed nano-sized markers on a silicon wafer sheet or silicon wafer using AutoCAD? And then there's where they can expand on photolithography and simplification of 2D nano sheets after growth, that kind of thing. So it's detail that isn't necessary and clogs up the resume. But again, to Robert's point, it's something that can be expanded on during the interview.
Yeah, and one other thing I think to just add to that from what Matt said is that it's always important for you to not just state something that you did. So let's take a look at the Devops Engineer piece description. The first bullet, it should read improved consistency and speed development by implementing Jenkins and Docker. But is it a 1% improvement in consistency? And it'd be great to be able to put percentages or numbers. I mean, just like think of it as a sales guy is not going to say I improved sales and that's going to get them the job. It's like, hey, I increased sales 400% in this period of time. So try and be as quantitative as you can to give people a taste of, well, if I bring this person on, like they improved the consistency and speed development in their Jenkins and Docker, I need that. And they were able to do it by this percentage. So I should expect that they'll be able to help me in that challenge that I have.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to resume number 2? Let me pull that one up. All right. We have another John Doe. Robert, why don't we start with you this time?
All right. So a couple of things. I think this one, as I say, breathed a little more. There was a lot more white space, which is good. I mean, I don't think that you have to overwhelm people in order to get a point across. I'd say that under the education, it's fine to put the education first, but I'd say that do you really need to call out that's in Corvallis, Oregon? You can probably just say Oregon State. And if it's a campus that's other than the main campus, I don't think you have to call that out. It's great that you put a GPA in. Of course, that may beg the question, is it have a 4 or a 5 scale? Moving on to the experience. Now, in this particular one, this person did call out how they saved money and stuff like that, which is great. I mean, I think that it's fantastic to call that stuff out. But I think the other thing is under accomplishments, if you look at the third bullet, traveled to the Frito-Lay headquarters in Plano, Texas to present project results. It's really not an accomplishment, it's an event. If you were to change that and say that presented project results, which resulted in a change in the process or something like that, that'd be great. But this is really recording an event. Moving down into being the mechanical intern. By the way, again, with the ordering, we've got the supply chain engineering intern from 2018 June to August, but then the mechanical engineering intern is 2017 to present. So I would obviously I'd probably put these in reverse chronological order with anything that you're doing presently is always at the top. On the next one, which is the mechanical engineering intern, the first bullet, I'd probably just reword. I would avoid using familiar terms like built something from scratch. I would use things like ideated and built a fully functional Brewster angle microscope in 1 month. And by the way, I like the fact that you called out the duration. In the third bullet, working with the team, design wheelchair umbrella for handicapped student. I'm curious, is this for one handicapped student or is this for handicapped students of a particular handicap? So it seems like it's for one person. So again, remember to always look and read back. And one thing that I learned in school was read things backwards. Start off with third bullet, go to the second bullet, go to the first bullet, because sometimes you get into a habit in reading in the order that you wrote it that you skip over things and you miss tiny things like that. Under activities, just like activities is misspelled, that would be a reason for me to probably put you in the right stack, which is not to review, because it's like this is your sales to me and you're selling that you can't spell, even though you have a word processor that can pick it up. I like that you have the school experience, but again, if you look at the dates, you've got March is properly capitalized, but then when you use October to June on the elementary school tutor, you capitalize it all. The other thing is I'd say is in the activities, the elementary school tutor I'd probably put down further in the list versus the design, build, fly, payload sub-team lead, because those are probably things that are more important to your job than being an elementary school tutor unless you're interviewing at a school. And then I guess the only other thing is the last thing on this resume, Gantt is capitalized.
So I did have a question. On here, he has activities. He has president from March 2018 to present, and he has design, build, fly, that bullet from October 2019 to present. So both of those are now till the present. How do you decide which to put at the top if you're still doing both of them?
I mean, I'll tell you, I think that whatever is more pertinent to the job, and then if they're equally important, then I would probably say pick the one that is most recent in terms of the one you most recently started, and the one that you've been at the longest would go second.
Okay, that's helpful. Matt, do you have any ideas about this one?
I sure do. So first off, when I'm looking at this one, there were a lot of things about this resume that really spoke to me in terms of undergraduates that I've worked with in the past that have been really outstanding. So this individual conveys to me an enthusiastic student who's involved in some interesting activities, self-starter, leader, that kind of thing. And the reason I say that is I see words like president, tutor, assistant manager, intern. This is a student, looks like they'll be graduating spring next year. They've had multiple internships. They're engaged in some activities. So I just wanted to convey that overall but the placement of these active titles struck me, and that was something I paid attention to. So if I were looking to hire someone, those things would resonate with me. Also, travel to Frito-Lay headquarters in Plano, Texas. That's not important to me, but the fact that you presented to a regional vice president is significant. I think that's what the student is really trying to convey here. They have some experience being in front of an executive, and that's great. And if they did well, or, I think Robert mentioned putting tying some type of performance to what it is that you're saying that will resonate with me is really, really helpful. Another thing here, just kind of reading between the lines, this student successfully completed 4 projects in a very short time span, June to August of 2018. So it indicates to me that this is a student who's, can be trusted under a tight timeline. Again, it would be helpful seeing maybe some more universal success that I can tie to what you did in those 4 projects under that very short period of time. But I just feel like that's something important that the student could have maybe drawn some attention to. So thinking through what is the core skill, what is the core selling point for this particular thing that I'm putting on my resume, and how can I tell that story more succinctly is really important. Under the mechanical engineering intern item, the fact this working with a team of engineering students, I want to hear more about what they did for this handicapped student or group of handicapped students. I think that is the type of project that it's a conversation starter. This is something that's very compelling and interesting. So, making sure that you give that type of an experience the proper treatment, I think, is really important here. The skills, design, build, fly, payload, sub-team lead. Gantt charts, figures of merit, and customer requirements. These are important translatable skills. Maybe having something like that, highlighting that a bit more would be very useful, particularly in the professional world. Those are skills that are going to be translatable and should definitely be something that you call a little more attention to. Yeah, I think between Robert's comments and mine, I think that's pretty much it for this one.
Great. Well, I say we keep moving and we'll look at resume number 3. Robert, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I like the statement that starts off right under the candidate's name and everything, talking about their CCAMP position. Again, going back to proper capitalization, make sure that the S in summer is capitalized. But I think that one of the things you want to do here is you want to reinforce what you want. And I think it's a double-edged sword here because, like I said, you have maybe 60 seconds to make an impression. And if you put something in the statement that is not a fit, you could be eliminated. So I just want to advise people to be careful when they put this in here. It's really about selling your capabilities, and I think that this person did this here without getting too specific as to what they wanted to do. I know that they're a mechanical engineer, that they're looking for when they want to do work, and that I think that reinforcing things that can't come across easily in the resume, such as being a fast learner and hard work and stuff, is great. One thing I would say is I would strike sociable off the end there. It seems to be a little bit redundant because you state that you're capable of working independently or in teams. If you're working in a team, you pretty much have to be sociable. Let's see. I would also recommend that for the education, I would put BS in mechanical engineering. Technical skills, I think it looks good, but PowerPoint I would probably spell out and make sure that people know that C is programming in C versus I just accidentally hit the C at a carriage return. The other thing I was going to mention to you, so moving into the work experience, like I said, this is an opportunity for you to give people an idea of size and scale, and later in your career they'll become more important. But if I'm looking at Cube 4D Ventures, is that a 2-person company? Is it a $25 million company? Is it a multinational company? It'd be great to give people some perspective that helps them identify with the company. Cube 4D Ventures could be just one person, right? But you want to at least help them. So if you did something like Cube 4D Ventures, and honestly, I would take out the location, because unless you're looking for a job that's in Canada, that could eliminate you, and that you really want to get to a position where somebody wants you and then they realize they have to relocate you, and then you've kind of sold them already versus giving them a reason to eliminate you. Well, this person's in Dorval, California, Canada, and I've got this job in the U.S. Let them first say I've got a job and this person's the right fit, and then have a relocation conversation secondary. Again, with the acronyms, a lot of things, GD&T does not transfer as well as FP&A or EBITDA and things like that. So if you're using acronyms that are in the business, you may want to spell them out and then put those in parentheses. Moving on to the next experience, you worked for Siemens and you're on the combustion team, I think, or is Siemens combustion team a proper noun? I don't know, but here is an opportunity. Going back to what I said before, Siemens is a huge German company, multi-billion-dollar company, and you're working on a team in one of their divisions. It'd be great to call that out. And aside from that, I think the resume looked really good. And then lastly, I think that this is something that a lot of people do, is that they say that references are available upon request. To me, I think that's redundant. If I'm interested in you, I'm going to ask you for a reference. I'm never going to say, well, can you give me a reference? It's like, if you want to work for me and I like what you have in your sales pitch to me, which is your resume, I'm going to ask you for a reference. And if not, my company probably has an application that you'll have to fill out 3 professional references.
Right. Matt, what are your thoughts?
First thing, I will very much agree with Robert on I like the little statement at the top. That also might be one of those things that helps you get through the HR review that was mentioned earlier. that will get you to a hiring manager. Just being able to, and that's also a good place where you can tailor the resume to a particular job posting, where you can call out some of those keywords. So yeah, I would say that that's very helpful. The headings here were interesting to me. It is nice because it clear, with the color, it clearly separates what's happening here. It just looks like an interesting kind of way of doing that. And I see fonts of different sizes. I see random paragraph spacing. So if you look down under assistant researcher, the spacing between the third and fourth bullet, it makes me wonder what's going on there with your formatting. Why is that there? Also, this particular position, it was August 2018 to September 2018. And my initial thoughts there is, okay, why was that 1 month? I think that doesn't mean you can't list this on the resume. It just means that might be a question you're going to get is, why was that such a short experience? And then I would look over here. There was a lot of work done in that very short period. So the Simulink models, the technical drawings, that's a lot to do. So I think maybe proactively addressing something like that, maybe giving me a little bit of information that would convey a better sense of why it was such a short position. If it was an internship or something like that, maybe calling that out would be very helpful. So I don't read more into it. We have wintermesters here at Virginia Tech where it'd be a January for a couple of weeks kind of thing, but I'd like to see why that was. This individual, certifications, projects, and extracurriculars feels a little bit like a catch-all. Some of these things, it might be possible to put up in skills, like the experience with a stereolithographic 3D printer might be a skill rather than something that is placed into this particular area. Because I don't kind of know what that is exactly. It's a catch-all for the things that didn't fit elsewhere. They're good things, but maybe the student can think about, can they more effectively place some of these items in other parts of the resume where they might get more appropriate attention and under the right, within the right context. Yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. So why don't we open this up to questions? I had a few questions that I thought of when we sat down to do this resume review that I just personally have always wanted to know the answer to. But also, if there's anybody on the line that wants to ask questions, we should definitely do that too. All right. So my first question was, this last resume had color in it, and I was wondering what were your thoughts on color being incorporated into resumes, because it seems like that's something that is becoming more popular, but as somebody on the other side, maybe on the hiring side, how do you feel about that?
So I think that the color works here. I would say that I would keep it to two colors. The color of the section, which would be here is blue, and then black. I wouldn't venture off into using more than two colors, nor would I venture off from using any other colors. I think that's, you could have skills and work experience in gray maybe, but I think that blue and black are professional colors.
Okay.
I'll agree. I think the color works, and I think the days of, we only have black ink printers, or, those are gone, and color is pretty ubiquitous now, and it's appealing for the eye. It's clear where sections are, and that's helpful.
All right, good to know. I think it's clear that most people that are students may want to stick to a single page. When do you start thinking that maybe 2 pages is okay, or is 2 pages ever okay?
So I'll tell you, my resume is 3 pages long, but I also have 27 years of experience that I'm trying to synthesize down into something that can be consumed easily. And I used to have a resume that was packed and there was no free space or whatever, but then I learned about giving things the ability to breathe and sink in, and having something to talk about, have a conversation about when I met face to face. So I think for coming right out of school, I think it's great to have a 1-pager. I think what will happen is, as you get further and further from your education, that your education will drop and be an add-on to the resume, and that your experience will be the primary focus. People like that you went to this school or that school, but that's not going to get you in the door at the job after your first job out of college. It will be what you did at your last job and how well does it fit. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the evolution of the professional here is really important. When you start feeling like you're stretching or you're putting a lot of narrative into the items listed on your resume to try to fill pages, I think that's when you start to think, maybe I'm stretching a bit here. I'm really presenting more of these experiences than perhaps what a hiring manager needs to see. And I felt like my resume personally really evolved over the years where, I didn't have a lot to say. And when I was coming out of undergrad, I had certain experiences and I wanted to be honest with what those were. And quite often when I was coming out, the purpose of my resume was to get more experience and to help grow that resume. So it's no mystery to a hiring manager that when you're a recent undergrad or when you're just coming out of school, we know what we should expect and don't try to stretch it into more than it is. But over time, depending on the type of work that you're in, it will naturally grow as you have publications, as you secure grant proposals, or as you have more really impactful things that you want to put on your resume. Start adding them and see where it ends up. And right now, I'll tell you, I have multiple resumes. So I have the NSF standard 2-pager that I will often submit with grant proposals, that sort of thing. But then also have a more comprehensive 8 or so page CV that includes a lot of those activities on there. And it's more of, again, a compilation of works rather than the quick summary. So I think they should feel comfortable with the resume being what it is. And as projects dictate, add more space.
To add on to that, as my resume grew, I started to cull experience out in terms of, like, if you look at these resumes, and these people did a great job. If you, like, on resume number 1, the most current experience, I think, the MIT experience, they had 4 bullets, and then they went down to 3. So I've done the same thing, where the most current experience, I have the most that I'm talking about. And then as I get further and further away, I'm mentioning, I'm calling out notable things, but it's fewer because they're probably less relevant than the work that I've done most recently. And that's what people are looking for. They don't care what I did 20 years ago in my second job. They want to know what's the most thing that has the most relevance is probably what I've done either in my current job or in my immediately preceding job.
So we actually have a question from the audience. So Max says, thank you for sharing. I wonder if there's some advice for CV or resumes for a PhD application. So this might be more up Matt's alley, maybe. But if either of you have ideas for that, that would be great.
I'll let Matt take that one. I have no experience there.
Sure. Wow. I'm trying to think back to what I submitted for that. I think with the PhD application, one of the challenges I had with this, and I'll just go ahead and state this, is we're talking about the resume, and the resume is very important, but there is a lot more to landing a position and to growing, to getting the positions that you want, to developing a professional network, that sort of thing, than just the resume. Actually, I very seldom share my resume unless there's some specific box I need to check. If I'm looking for a job opportunity or project opportunity, the CV is often not the first thing that folks see from me. There'll be a conversation. There'll be something else that suggests my interest. So specifically for the PhD, I think leading with a query about, so maybe you find a faculty member whose lab you're interested in working with, reaching out to that person with an email that demonstrates that you know the type of work that they're doing, you have interest in the work that they're doing. And again, it's very customized for that particular lab that you want to be in. And then your resume becomes, having a standard resume at that point is fine, but you're tailoring it specifically. You're showing interest in that professor that you want to work with, and not just talking about it, but you're actually demonstrating it by some knowledge or awareness of their work. I think those things, that's how I got into my PhD position. It was a conversation with a prospective advisor, and And then the resume became a box that we checked in the application process. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's more representative of the real world than just throwing out a resume there. If you're just doing that, it might be a long shot to get your foot in the door.
And I think a lot of people do that. So it's definitely trying to make that human connection, I think, is really important. So I don't want to go past 5. So if there's anybody else in the audience that has questions, make sure you get them in now. We have a response from Max, and he says, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. So make sure to get your questions in really quick. I just want to ask, is there a way to list a skill that you've developed outside of a professional setting, like something you've done as a hobby? How do you kind of incorporate something like that into your resume, especially if it's something that the job is looking for?
You want to go first, Robert? Okay. I think you got to be clever about it. I think that, for me, again, going back to my Kiva lending team thing, that's something that I add at the end of my resume is just, this is something I care about and I want to talk about it. So it's part of who I am. And, certainly you kind of list it and highlight briefly what the skills are that tie into that. I don't think there's I think it can be as straightforward as that, as, maybe it's not what you put front and center. You don't compete with the experiences that are specific for that job, but you can absolutely put it in there in the other activities and interests or extracurriculars, as this one student pointed out. Yeah, add it in there. Put it in there at the end if you can't find a better place for it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if there's a way to put it in there and it's not distracting and maybe gives a different facet to who you are as a person, I think it's great. I mean, like I said, this is you have one shot to make an impression, and if there's something that gets a follow-on conversation, then I'd recommend doing it.
And it might be good to get a second opinion on it. So maybe if you have a mentor, advisor, run it by them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Does this add, or am I being silly here? Because I have seen silly, and it's a fine line. But maybe get somebody else's opinion on your particular addition.
I have actually done that too. I put something on my resume and then I showed it to someone else and they were like, no, take that off. And I was like, okay. On that note, I think this has been a really wonderful conversation. I think people are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Mallory.